By its 10th anniversary in 2001, the Global Forest and Trade Network had spread and now included 90 companies buying and trading forest products. And yet one thing became increasingly clear. For GFTN to continue to grow and work toward responsible forestry worldwide, the network had to expand its focus. In addition to working with buyer companies, GFTN needed to help drive change directly on the ground. Two people at the forefront of that change were Bruce Cabarle and Rodney Taylor. Bruce Cabarle, now leader of WWF's Forest Carbon Initiative, was head of the forest program for WWF US in 2002. Rodney Taylor is director of forests for WWF International, and in 2002 served as GFTN manager in the Asia-Pacific region. We spoke with Bruce and Rodney about GFTN's expanded focus.
By 2002, GFTN had built up an enormous market demand for certified products, but we had a big problem. There wasn't supply to match that demand, and particularly in the forest that WWF cared about, we weren't achieving certification.
Why was certification so important? What did independent, credible certification mean for the environment? And what did it mean for the forest products industry?
Well, at the time, the forest products industry was under siege. It had a credibility problem. And the credibility problem was associated with the availability of information, satellite imagery that essentially told an increasingly discouraging story about increasing loss and degradation of the world's forest, and more times than not, images of that were associated with people cutting down trees. And that was a stigmatism that got attached to the forest products industry. So the forest products industry needed some way to distinguish the responsible players from the irresponsible players. And lo and behold, that was the whole genesis behind certification. And it was to come up with a way by which we could actually follow the products back through the value chain to the forest from where they came, and the management practices that were being employed in those forests in a way that was environmentally responsible and ecologically sound. And the job of the GFTN, and the reason why we launched that, the Global Forest and Trade Network, was essentially to connect the dots.
Was this successful? Was GFTN able to connect the dots? Why?
The producer group model spread very quickly throughout the world. I think the reason was pretty straightforward. We had a huge bank of companies in the GFTN who were demanding certified products, and they were basically able to ask their suppliers to join the producer groups and get support to get certified. Secondly, we had a presence in the producer countries, and those companies came to WWF as a natural partner to help them understand this new concept of certification.
But as it turned out, this new idea was not without challenges.
In the early years of certification, what we found is that certification was adopted and grew most quickly in the traditional centers of forest product production and consumption. And that happens to be in places like Scandinavia, the United States of America, and Western Europe. Those places did not necessarily line up with WWF's global priorities for conservation, which were found in such places as the heart of Borneo, the Amazon basin, or the Congo basin in the heart of Africa.
Why wasn't certification happening in these crucial places?
So the challenges of kind of working in frontiers on the edge of the known universe in the absence of the rule of law, you face lots of big challenges. Illegal logging was rampant in a lot of these places, which then becomes a competitive issue.
In 2002 in Washington, D.C., WWF joined forces with the U.S. Agency for International Development and Certified Products Council, now Metafor. Together, they formed the Sustainable Forest Products Global Alliance. The aim was to use the market to improve forest management around the world. What was and continues to be the significance of this kind of partnership for GFTN?
We knew that we needed to evolve the model to address this situation of where producers in developing countries couldn't meet the Forest Stewardship Council standard, even though they wanted to. And there was no incentive for them to make the necessary investments. But we didn't have the resources to do that at the time. And so the partnership with the U.S. Agency for International Development at the time was really the catalyst that provided the seed capital we needed to put in place the stepwise program to earning the Forest Stewardship Council standard, sort of pay as you go until you get there type of program.
And why was this type of program, this stepwise approach, necessary?
Now, the challenge was until you actually earned the standard, you got no recognition. So if you were well below the standard, there was no incentive for you to come up. And in many developing countries, the producers were at a competitive disadvantage just because there were no laws or practices in place that approximated the standards that were being required. And so what we did was we took forest certification under the Forest Stewardship Council, which is really a collection of a number of management practices, and we broke that down into their component pieces, and we put together training programs that would allow people to implement the program piece by piece and over time work their way up to attaining the standard.
How did GFTN specifically support producers?
First and foremost, we gave them a new business model. We gave them technical assistance in order to implement that business model. And then thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, we gave them a way to tell their story on how they were improving their practices through a system that had checks and balances and independent monitoring and reporting.
As it turned out, this system, including the stepwise approach, was good for the entire forest products industry. It was good for the producers and the buyers.
This was a really powerful risk management concept for the buyers. They could keep buying from these companies even though they weren't certified, but knowing they were legal and knowing that they were on the road to certification, and sooner or later they could expect them to be providing certified products into their supply chains.
Powerful concept or not, there were still critics. In fact, many believed it would be impossible to certify forests in such areas as the Amazon, Borneo, Sumatra, Congo Basin, and the Russian Far East.
The naysayers, actually I would say the naysayers are still out there. They haven't entirely gone away. But essentially the critique, the naysayers were saying that it was impossible to sustainably manage forests in the tropics and in places that were subjected to long histories of illegality, graft, corruption. So did we ever doubt it would work? No, not really, because it had to work. You know, the alternative, which is what was not acceptable. Right, so we had to move forward, and we did.
When did the network suspect they were proving the critics wrong?
I think reaching the 1 million hectare mark in several of the key producer countries was very, very historic. And so in places such as the Congo or the Amazon, where the naysayers had said that it was impossible to practice responsible, let alone sustainable forestry, and even if you were able to do it, they would be one-offs, it would be a fluke. But once you start hitting the 1,000,000-hectare mark in several of these places, it then precipitates systemic change.
Was it a brave move for WWF to work with uncertified forest companies in 2002? Very brave, but not stupid. We had very good reasons for wanting to work with these companies, and the producer group framework managed the risk for us in doing so. It gave us a very structured framework which those companies were required to progress through, and if things went wrong, we could suspend the relationship. Yet if things went right, we were expanding the supply of certified products in the countries where we valued the forests most.
It is the 20th anniversary of GFTN, and now more than 75 producer companies participate in the network. In looking back and in looking ahead, we can't help but ask, why, especially in the face of so many challenges, is this model showing such clear signs of success?
I mean, why does anything in life succeed? It's usually because you've got a bright idea whose time is right, and you have a group of people who won't take no for an answer. And you know, it's a combination of those things. You know, it was a novel idea. It was a plausible solution because it was very pragmatic. It came at a time when change was needed. I mean, it was clear that the world had changed, that the former way of doing business as usual was no longer acceptable. Something had to give, and it was just really a question of were large segments of the market just going to get shut down and locked out, or were we going to come up with an alternative model that would show that that you can conduct business and do that in a manner that's environmentally sound and socially beneficial to the people who live in and around the forest.